Hello, this is Tuesday, September 29th, and I'm recording the lesson for 11th grade English. I'm on the Schoology page looking at our agenda. You can see that our topic is Pocahontas, and we'll go into that in a moment, but I want to skim to the bottom so you can see we ended class with a group quiz. So that was new. Usually we do just the STEM. Today there's the STEM and the group quiz, and that is my attempt to see how your background knowledge has developed around Pocahontas and the early settlers who came and encountered the Powhatan Indians. So with that in mind, let's go through the slides. This is all part of the week slides, the concept of coexistence in Native America. So scroll down until you see day 2, and the topic there is Pocahontas Truce Maker. We started with this read aloud and think aloud. It's a more complex topic than yesterday's read aloud. My question is, were the British racist toward the Powhatan Indians they encountered? And the short answer here is no. It wasn't racism, it was something else. So we're going to read it and try to see if we can figure out what that something else is. To understand what the English actually meant, though, one has to set aside the intervening 400 years of American racial history. Seen through the prism of those 400 years, the English attitudes look like racism. How could it not be? Improbably enough, though, the English of 1606 were not generally racist in their view of the Virginia natives, not in the conventional sense. The English did not believe that white people like themselves were innately superior and the natives innately inferior. Savagery had nothing to do with biology. It also did not signify that the natives were necessarily fierce, because they knew some tribes were and some weren't. For the English, savagery instead referred to the cultural condition of primitivity, to be primitive. The opposite of savage was not white, it was civilized or Christian. So think aloud for me, pausing to put that in my own words or my own thoughts, that racism is very specifically believing that one's race determines one's end point, that one's race is the explanation for how one behaves, and typically it has to do with racial hierarchy, but it doesn't have to. Racism is simply believing that you can categorize somebody according to their race. And what I'm hearing is the British in the 1606 era, 1607, didn't think that about the Indians they encountered. They didn't think that to be Indian, to be that quote-unquote race, was to be inferior. Instead, they thought it had to do with whether or not the Indians were cultured, had received the appropriate amounts of civilization to be superior, but that anyone could be that if they just had the opportunity to be. So nobody was resigned to any destiny because of race. Rather, it was just where these Indians lived that made them seem inferior. And the British thought they could fix that. So it's not quite racism. It's ethnocentrism instead. I'm going to keep reading. This may sound like at first a distinction without a difference, but its implications were significant. It meant savagery was only the starting point for a people's progression toward modernity, toward modern times. It was a temporary condition, which did not render those within it less than fully human. All right, so I'm hearing that means that the people who were savages could be improved. It wasn't their fault or their biology that made them savage. It was just where they were in the world. So the British thought that they could move someone along. And I'm guessing because it says earlier in the paragraph, civilized or Christian, they thought Christianity meant civilization. So let me keep reading. Savages could not be rightfully enslaved. Violence could not be unleashed against savages without just cause. Reflecting the spirit of the time, Strachey wrote of the natives, "We are taught to acknowledge every man that bears the impression of God's stamp, to be not only our neighbor, but to be our brother." John Smith later denounced an English mariner named Thomas Hunt for capturing 27 natives in New England and selling those souls into slavery. Okay, this is really interesting to me. So it's suggesting that the British do not think the Indians are lesser than them, that they are actually just brothers on another continent, but they're probably going to move into this spirit of civilizing them and believing that they can give them certain things like religion and culture to make them more refined. But it seems like they didn't support the slavery of these Indian peoples that they encountered. And I think that will become important later, knowing what we know about American history. So were they racist? No, they were something else. And here we have the conflict that Chief Powhatan brings about with the British actions, and then Pocahontas is the truce that settles this conflict down. In 1609, Powhatan ordered his warriors to lay siege to James Fort, Jamestown, which was the catalyst for the infamous Starving Time winter that killed several hundred colonists. Pause. So not only were the colonists dying in droves when they first arrived, in 1609, it got even worse, and they were really starving. And that's partly because Powhatan decided to stop helping them grow and obtain food. So this became the first steps of the Anglo-English Powhatan War, which lasted until the 1614 marriage of one of Powhatan's daughters, Pocahontas, to English colonist John Rolfe. This marriage had the blessing of Powhatan and led to a relatively peaceful period in relations between the two peoples. So we have here just like a really familiar thing where two groups are warring, and then the marriage of one person from each group settles things down. And I remember that from other studies of world history. So I'm going to go back for a moment to this word ethnocentrism, because all of this explains why this marriage of Pocahontas and John Rolfe was condoned by both sides. Ethnocentrism is when one believes their culture to be superior to another culture, and they see everything about that other culture through the lens of their own. So by this logic, the British would have seen Pocahontas and thought, well, this would work, but we need to make her more acceptable by our cultural standards. And similarly, the Indians would have seen the British and said, okay, they're kind of doing things strangely, but what can we do to make them act according to our cultural standards? And so both were trying to do what they thought would benefit each group. And as a result, we have Pocahontas marrying John Rolfe. Here is an image that captures all of those thoughts together. So what is going on here? What is happening in this painting? For me, this is a visual discovery of ethnocentrism, sort of in its essence. We have Pocahontas kneeling down before this priest. Behind her here is her would-be husband, John Rolfe. And then we have characters that we've seen before, likely her father, Chief Powhatan, and other members of her tribe. They're present inside of this church. And this is not the wedding of John Rolfe and Pocahontas. This is another ceremony. Yes, it is her baptism. So before she can become a fully ordained British member, she has to be Christian, because that would be the essence of civilized in the eyes of the British. And so here she is, the first Indian convert to Christianity on the continent. 1613, 1614, this is Jamestown. Here's I can't play this because of copyright, but if you're watching this on your own, I encourage you to. It's about 5 minutes long, and you only have to watch a minute to capture the spirit of it. This is a movie that came out a while ago called The New World. It's a really beautiful film, lots of gorgeous music and scenery. There's not a lot of dialogue in this part. It's John Rolfe, here played by Christian Bale, Batman, who is here in his British garden with his new wife, Pocahontas. And so she comes out running across the fields in her British wear and is this ordained British princess of a sorts. And to see her in this English world is really jarring after having watched her through her own territory, the Powhatan territory. She was presented to King James of Jamestown and Queen Anne, and was the source of a lot of excitement in England, because at the time, everybody wanted to know everything about Virginia, and here you have this Virginia Indian princess. Okay, so Pocahontas in England. Here's your stem for today. Write this in Tuesday, September 29th. We're still doing because, but, so statements. Pocahontas married John Rolfe, but, because, and so. 3 sentences. let me remind you, it need not be more than 3 sentences. Some people are writing a whole paragraph. It's not necessary. I'm judging you on the perfection of your grammar and of the reflection of your understanding of the content. And more is not necessarily better here. So 3 excellent sentences is what I require and nothing else. Okay, so all of that is something that I hope prepares you for this next step, which is your group quiz. You have to complete this quiz individually, and so if you're watching this video from home without a group, that's fine. You're not really at a terrible disadvantage. It's just that your classmates who are in class were in a breakout room and could ask other people their opinions about different questions, and they could share answers and thinking. That doesn't necessarily mean they all did. It just meant that was available to them. They are always allowed to select answers different than the group had selected. So if you're doing this quiz on your own, independently, without someone else at your side, then I would encourage you to stop before you take the quiz, go back and familiarize yourself with last night's readings, just like quickly skim one of those choices so you have that really fresh in your mind. And that will serve as a kind of group member for you, is someone else is writing about Pocahontas. When you're ready, come back and then take the quiz. This is called Seneca-Moco, My World. It's a piece of historical fiction that it's a pretense. Julie Durway pretends to be Pocahontas and writes this as like a letter to her son. There's 2 paths to access the quiz. You can just come to this slide and click on that link directly, or you can log into your Common Lit account and take the assigned quiz there. Don't need to tell me what you did or how you did. It'll send me the results as soon as you're done. And that is class. That's the end of day 2. Good luck. Let me know if you have any questions.